Why does Europe seem so complicated? So many countries, so many rules, so many layers of government. You look at the European Union and it can feel like a maze of regulations and committees. But what if I told you this complexity isn't a bug, it's a feature? It's the result of a deep, historical lesson etched into the very soul of the continent, an intense fear of concentrated power. To understand Europe today, you have to understand its past, a past filled with emperors, kings, and dictators who taught a very painful lesson about what happens when one person or one group holds too much control. Let's rewind the clock. For centuries, Europe was a battleground. The Roman Empire rose and fell, leaving behind a legacy of centralized authority. But after Rome, Europe fragmented into a mosaic of kingdoms, duchies, and city-states. Power was a constant struggle. You had the Holy Roman Emperor, but he was often at odds with the Pope. You had powerful kings, but they had to contend with rebellious nobles who had their own armies and castles. This wasn't a system designed for efficiency. It was a constant, messy negotiation of power. No single entity could easily dominate the others. This created a natural, albeit chaotic, system of checks and balances. Then came the age of absolutism. Think of Louis XIV of France, the Sun King, who famously declared, "L'état, c'est moi, I am the state." This was the peak of concentrated monarchical power. Kings built lavish palaces like Versailles not just as homes, but as symbols of their absolute authority, demanding loyalty and obedience from everyone. While this brought a degree of stability and national unity, it also planted the seeds of its own destruction. People living under the thumb of an all-powerful monarch began to dream of something different: liberty, representation, and a say in their own destiny. The French Revolution was the explosion. It was a violent, radical rejection of absolute monarchy and aristocratic privilege. The cry for liberty, equality, fraternity echoed across Europe. But the revolution also offered a cautionary tale. In their zeal to dismantle the old order, the revolutionaries themselves created a new form of terror, culminating in the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon, a brilliant general and political strategist, crowned himself emperor. He nearly conquered the entire continent, replacing old monarchies with his own centralized, French-dominated system. For a brief, terrifying moment, it looked like one man would rule all of Europe. The defeat of Napoleon in 1815 was a pivotal moment. The great powers of Europe gathered at the Congress of Vienna, not to create a single European state, but to do the exact opposite. Their goal was to establish a balance of power. They redrew the map and created alliances with one primary objective: to prevent any single nation from ever becoming powerful enough to dominate the others again. This concept that peace is best maintained when power is distributed and balanced became a cornerstone of European diplomacy for the next century. It was a formal acknowledgement that concentrated power was the greatest threat to stability. But the 20th century would test this idea to its absolute limit. The First World War shattered the old balance of power, leading to the collapse of empires. And in the chaos that followed, something far more sinister emerged. In Italy, Russia, Germany, and Spain, totalitarian regimes rose. Fascism, Nazism, and communism offered twisted promises of national glory and utopian futures, but they all shared one core characteristic: the complete and total concentration of power in the hands of a single party and a single, charismatic leader. The state controlled everything: the economy, the media, the schools, and even people's private thoughts. Individuality was crushed in favor of the collective, and dissent was met with brutal repression. The horrors of World War II, the Holocaust, the gulags, the systematic destruction of entire populations were the ultimate, devastating consequence of unchecked, concentrated power. When the war finally ended, Europe was in ruins, both physically and morally. The survivors looked at the rubble and asked a fundamental question: how do we prevent this from ever happening again? The answer was not to create another Napoleon or another superstate. The answer was to build a new Europe on a foundation of shared sovereignty and institutional checks and balances. This is the origin story of the European Union. It started not as a grand political project, but as a practical one, the European Coal and Steel Community. The idea, proposed by French statesman Robert Schuman, was simple but genius. France and Germany, historical enemies who had fought 3 wars in 70 years, would pool their coal and steel production under a common high authority. By intertwining their most vital war-making industries, they made future conflict between them not merely unthinkable, but materially impossible. It was a deliberate surrender of some national power to a supranational body to guarantee peace. From that small seed, the EU grew. The goal was always to bind the nations of Europe together so tightly, through economic and legal ties, that war would become obsolete. But look at how the EU is structured. It's a complex web of institutions. You have the European Commission, which proposes laws. The European Parliament, whose members are directly elected by citizens to vote on those laws. And the Council of the European Union, where the governments of the member states have their say. Decisions often require broad consensus or complex voting majorities. It can be slow, it can be frustrating, but that's the point. The system is intentionally designed to be difficult, to prevent any one country or any one institution from accumulating too much power too quickly. Think about it, the president of the European Commission is not a European president with unilateral power. The EU has no single, unified army. Crucial decisions on foreign policy and taxation still require the unanimous consent of all member countries. Every new treaty, every expansion, is a long, drawn-out negotiation. This isn't weakness, it's a deeply ingrained safety mechanism born from centuries of trauma. It's the ghost of Napoleon, the shadow of Hitler, and the memory of the Iron Curtain influencing every paragraph of every treaty. This fear of concentrated power is visible everywhere in modern Europe, not just in Brussels. Many European countries have coalition governments where multiple political parties must cooperate to rule. This forces compromise and prevents one party from imposing its will unchecked. They have strong constitutional courts that can strike down laws passed by the legislature. They have fiercely independent media and robust protections for civil society. It's a political culture built on skepticism of authority. The question is never just, is this efficient? But is this safe? Where are the checks and balances? So the next time you hear about a European regulation on the curvature of bananas or a seemingly endless debate over a new policy, remember where it comes from. It's not just bureaucracy for bureaucracy's sake. It's the modern expression of a very old fear. It's the legacy of centuries of conflict, a continent-wide commitment to ensuring that power is always shared, always limited, and always held accountable. It's messy, it's complicated, but for a continent that has seen the darkest depths of what concentrated power can do, it's a price they are more than willing to pay for peace and stability. Thanks for watching. If you found this perspective on Europe interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the ideas that shape our world. See you next time.